The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the Salida, Colorado General Store, and Clayton Pierce knew his carefully ordered life was about to change forever when he saw the woman step down onto the dusty street with nothing but a worn carpetbag and eyes full of terror. He had not expected her to be beautiful. The arrangements had been made through letters exchanged with an agency back east, practical discussions about homesteading and the need for a wife in this rugged territory. The year was 1883, and Clayton had built a modest ranch on the outskirts of town after spending 5 years breaking horses and saving every dollar. At 26, he figured it was time to settle down properly, and the chances of finding a suitable woman in a town of mostly miners and cattlemen seemed slim. So he had written to the agency, paid the fees, and waited. But nothing in those formal letters had prepared him for the reality of Celeste Grayson standing before him, dark hair escaping from beneath a threadbare bonnet, dress patched and mended a dozen times, looking at him with such profound apprehension that he felt like some kind of monster. He removed his hat quickly, running a hand through his son's streaked brown hair, suddenly aware of the dust coating his boots and the wear in his own clothes. "Miss Grayson," he said, his voice coming out rougher than intended. She stared at him blankly. Her lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. The stagecoach driver was already hauling down a small trunk from the back, dumping it unceremoniously beside her. "That is all," the driver said with a shrug. "Good luck to you both." Clayton stepped forward, reaching for the trunk, and the woman flinched. Actually flinched, as if he might strike her. He froze, keeping his movements slow and deliberate as he picked up the trunk. It weighed almost nothing. "Welcome to Salida," he tried again, gesturing toward the town spread out behind him. The Arkansas River ran swift and cold through the valley, and the Sawatch Range rose up magnificent and snow capped in the distance. It was beautiful country, even if it was harsh. She said something then, a string of words that made no sense to him at all. The sounds were unfamiliar, lilting and soft, nothing like English. Clayton felt his stomach drop. "You do not speak English," he said, not really a question. Her expression told him everything. She looked down at her hands, twisting them together, and he saw tears threatening to spill over. The agency had assured him that the bride would speak English, or at least enough to get by. They had lied, or more likely, they had simply wanted his money and did not care about the consequences. Clayton stood there in the middle of the street, holding this woman's entire life in a trunk that weighed less than a saddle, and realized he had two choices. He could put her back on the next stagecoach and demand his money back, leaving her to whatever fate awaited her back east. Or he could figure this out. He had never been the kind of man to abandon something just because it got difficult. "Come on," he said gently, gesturing toward his horse and wagon. "Let us get you home." She followed him cautiously, keeping several feet between them. He loaded her trunk into the wagon bed, and then offered his hand to help her up onto the seat. She stared at his outstretched palm for a long moment before placing her much smaller hand in his. Her fingers were cold despite the warm September afternoon, and he could feel them trembling. The ride out to his ranch took 30 minutes along a rutted dirt road that followed the river. Clayton tried several times to make conversation, pointing out landmarks, but gave up when he realized how foolish he must sound. She sat rigid beside him, hands folded in her lap, eyes taking in the vast landscape with what looked like growing alarm. He supposed it was quite different from wherever she had come from. His ranch was modest but sturdy, built with his own hands from logs cut in the surrounding forest. There was a main house with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting area. The barn was newer, meant for the horses he bred and trained. A chicken coop, a smokehouse, a root cellar, and a well with good cold water. Corrals stretched out behind the barn where 4 horses currently grazed. It was not much, but it was his, built with honest work. He helped her down from the wagon and carried her trunk inside, setting it in what would be her bedroom. His bedroom, really, the larger of the two. He had moved his own things into the smaller room that morning, thinking it only right. When he turned around, she was standing in the doorway, looking around with wide eyes. Clayton gestured to the room. "This is yours. You can settle in, rest. I will make us some supper." More meaningless words to her, but his tone must have conveyed something because she nodded slowly. He left her there and went to the kitchen, suddenly aware that he had no idea what she might eat, what she might be accustomed to. He had venison stew simmering already, had baked bread that morning. It would have to do. As he worked, he heard her moving around in the other room, quiet sounds of someone trying not to be noticed. His mind raced through the problem. He needed to understand her, and she needed to understand him. But how did 2 people communicate when they shared no common language? Supper was an awkward affair. She ate the stew tentatively at first, then with more enthusiasm, which he took as a good sign. He tried to ask her questions, pointing to things and saying their names. Bread, water, stew. She watched him with those dark, intelligent eyes but said nothing. After the meal, she insisted on cleaning up, practically leaping to her feet when he started to gather the dishes. He let her, sensing that she needed something to do, some way to feel useful. He went outside to tend to the horses, giving her space, trying to think through what came next. When he came back inside as darkness fell, she was standing by the window, looking out at the mountains barely visible in the fading light. She turned when she heard him, and he saw tracks of tears on her cheeks. "Hey now," he said softly, instinctively moving toward her. She did not flinch this time, which he took as progress. He pulled out his handkerchief and offered it to her. She took it, dabbing at her eyes, and then spoke again in that language he did not know, a whole stream of words that sounded like grief and fear and exhaustion all mixed together. "I wish I could understand you," he said helplessly. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and said something different. Just a few words, slow and clear, as if she were trying to teach him. Then she pointed to herself. He listened carefully. It sounded like she was saying her name, but different from Celeste. He tried to repeat it, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds. She shook her head and said it again. After 3 more attempts, he got closer and she nodded. Then she pointed to him, questioning. "Clayton," he said, pointing to his chest. "Clayton Pierce." She tried it, her accent making it sound exotic and musical. "Clayton." It was a start. Over the next few days, they developed a strange routine. Clayton would rise before dawn, tend to the animals, then come back to find her already up, having made breakfast with whatever she could find in his pantry. She was a good cook, he discovered, able to make something delicious out of the simplest ingredients. They would eat together, and then he would try to teach her English words while also attempting to learn her language. He still did not know what language it was. There was a Polish family living on the other side of town, and he had ridden over to ask them if they recognized it. They did not. The school teacher, Mrs. Patterson, suggested it might be Russian or something from that part of the world, but she could not say for certain. Celeste, as he continued to call her in his mind even though he knew it was not quite right, was patient with him. She would point to objects and say the word in her language, then wait for him to repeat it. He had a small notebook that he started carrying, writing down words phonetically, trying to build some kind of translation guide. Chair, table, horse, sky, water, bread. The simple things came first. Then verbs: eat, drink, sleep, work. The language felt strange in his mouth, all different sounds and rhythms than he was used to, but he kept at it. Every evening after supper, they would sit at the table with the lamp between them, and she would teach him more words, correcting his pronunciation with gentle patience. He learned that she laughed when she was surprised by something good, a delighted sound that made him want to hear it again. He learned that she hummed when she cooked, melodies he did not recognize but found beautiful anyway. He learned that she was afraid of the horses at first but determined not to show it, and that she cried quietly in her room some nights when she thought he could not hear. 3 weeks in, a problem arose that he had been dreading. He needed to go into town for supplies, and he was not sure whether to take her with him or leave her at the ranch. Taking her meant subjecting her to the stares and whispers of the townspeople. Leaving her meant she would be alone in an unfamiliar place. In the end, he decided to give her the choice. Using the words he had learned and a lot of hand gestures, he explained that he needed to go to town. She could come with him or stay here. He would be gone a few hours. She chose to come. Salida on a Saturday morning was busy with miners and ranchers coming in for supplies and socializing. Clayton helped Celeste down from the wagon and immediately felt the weight of curious eyes. Sarah Mitchell, the banker's wife, stopped in her tracks and stared. Tom Webster, who owned the livery, raised his eyebrows. By the time they reached the general store, it felt like half the town was watching. Clayton Pierce, is this your mail-order bride we have been hearing about? Sarah Mitchell appeared beside them, her voice carrying that particular tone of a woman looking for gossip. "This is my wife, Celeste," Clayton said firmly, though they had not yet been to see the preacher for a proper ceremony. He had been waiting, thinking it should be her choice whether to go through with it once she understood what it meant. "How exotic," Sarah said, eyeing Celeste's dress, which she had mended and altered to fit better. "Where is she from?" "Back east," Clayton said vaguely. "And does she speak English?" Before Clayton could answer, Celeste surprised him by speaking up herself. "Little," she said carefully, one of the English words he had been teaching her. "Learning." Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Well, that must be quite challenging for you both." There was judgment in her voice, and Clayton felt his jaw tighten. But Celeste just smiled politely, not understanding the subtext, and Clayton guided her into the store with a hand on her back. Inside, he let her wander while he spoke with the shopkeeper, Mr. Henderson, about supplies. He was asking about coffee and flour when he heard Celeste make a small sound of distress. He turned to find her backing away from a shelf, looking pale. He went to her immediately. "What is wrong?" She pointed at something on the shelf, speaking rapidly in her language. He looked and saw it was just bottles of patent medicine, nothing alarming. But her reaction suggested otherwise. She kept saying one word over and over, and finally he pulled out his notebook, wrote it down phonetically, and filed it away to ask her about later when he could make himself understood better. They finished the shopping without further incident, though Clayton noticed the curious looks following them. As they loaded supplies into the wagon, the preacher, Reverend Thomas, approached. "Mr. Pierce, I hope you are planning to make an honest woman of your bride," he said without preamble. Clayton bit back a sharp retort. "We will come see you when we are ready, Reverend. The talk in town is that you are living in sin." "The talk in town should mind its own business." Clayton's voice was harder now. "My wife does not speak English yet. I am not going to put her through a ceremony she cannot understand. When we are ready, we will come to you." The Reverend frowned but nodded. "See that you do." On the ride home, Celeste was quiet, staring at her hands. Clayton wanted to ask what had upset her in the store, but he lacked the words. The frustration of not being able to communicate properly was like a physical weight. That evening, they sat at their usual spots at the table, the lamp between them. But instead of starting the language lesson, Clayton pulled out the notebook and pointed to the word he had written from the store. Her face went carefully blank. She looked at the word, then at him, then down at her hands. "Please," he said, using one of the words in her language that he had learned. It was perhaps his most important word so far. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Slowly, using the simple English words she had learned combined with her own language, painting pictures with her hands when words failed, she told him a story. It took a long time, with many stops and starts, much pointing at his notebook where he had written down words, and some things he could only guess at. But piece by piece, he understood. She was not from back east, not really. She had been brought to America 5 years ago, barely 17 years old, by men who promised work and a better life. Instead, she and other girls had been forced into situations she could not quite explain, but that made Clayton's blood run cold. She had escaped 2 years ago with the help of a woman who ran a safe house. That woman had connections to the mail-order bride agency, a way to get girls like Celeste far away from the cities and the men who might be looking for them. The medicine bottles in the store had labels she recognized, bottles she had seen used to drug girls into compliance. By the time she finished, Clayton felt sick. The careful way she had moved around him those first days made horrible sense now. The fear in her eyes, the flinching. "I am sorry," he said, wishing desperately that he knew how to say more in her language. "I am so sorry that happened to you." She did not understand all the words, but she must have understood the tone because her eyes filled with tears. She said something soft, and though he did not know the exact translation, he thought it might be "thank you." They sat in silence for a while. Then Clayton made a decision. He got up and went to his bedroom, returning with the thick envelope he kept in his top drawer. It contained money, his savings that he had built up over years of hard work. He placed it on the table in front of her. Using simple words and gestures, he explained that if she wanted to leave, he would take her to the train station. This money would get her far away, let her start over somewhere else. She could go to California or north to Canada, anywhere she wanted. He would not stop her. She stared at the envelope for a long time. Then she looked up at him, searching his face for something. Finally, she pushed the envelope back toward him. "Stay," she said in English, one of the words he had taught her. Then she said something in her own language, pointing to him, to the house around them, to the ring he had given her when she arrived, a simple band she wore on a chain around her neck because it had been too large for her finger. "You want to stay?" he asked, hardly believing it. She nodded. "Stay, with Clayton." Something in his chest felt like it cracked open. He had not expected this, had not expected her to choose him, to choose this life. He covered her hand with his, careful and gentle, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. She did not. Instead, she turned her hand over so their palms touched, and they sat like that in the lamplight, not speaking, not needing to. From that night on, things changed between them. The fear faded from her eyes when she looked at him. She started smiling more, especially when he mangled words in her language so badly that they became nonsense. She teased him, he realized, when she repeated his mistakes back to him with exaggerated pronunciation. He found himself laughing more than he had in years. He also doubled his efforts to learn her language. If she was staying, if she was truly going to be his wife, then he needed to be able to talk to her properly. He started riding into town once a week to use the small library, looking for any books that might help. He found an old dictionary of Eastern European languages and discovered that her language was indeed Russian, or at least a dialect of it. It did not help much with pronunciation, but it gave him more vocabulary to work with. Winter came early to the Colorado mountains that year. By mid-October, snow was already dusting the higher peaks, and the nights turned cold enough to see your breath. Clayton made sure the house was well stocked with firewood and supplies. He showed Celeste how to bar the door and where he kept his rifle, just in case, though he did not expect trouble. One evening in late October, when they had been married in all but official ceremony for nearly 2 months, they sat by the fireplace instead of at the table. It was warmer there and more comfortable. Celeste was mending one of his shirts, and Clayton was working on a new bridle for one of the horses. The domestic peace of it struck him suddenly. This was what he had wanted when he sent away for a bride, but it was so much more than he had imagined. "Clayton," she said suddenly, and he looked up. She had set aside the mending and was watching him with an expression he could not quite read. She spoke in Russian, slow and clear. He had learned enough by now to understand most of it. She was saying that she had been afraid when she arrived. Afraid of him, of this place, of what would happen to her. But he had been kind, patient, good. She paused, then said something else, a phrase he did not know. He pulled out the notebook, and she wrote the words in the Cyrillic alphabet she had been teaching him. He sounded them out slowly. "I trust you," she nodded, then said something more. This time he caught the words. "I am happy, here." Clayton set aside the bridle. His hands were not quite steady. "I am happy, too, that you stayed." They looked at each other across the firelight, and Clayton felt the words rising in his chest, words he had been trying to learn how to say properly for weeks now. He had been practicing, writing them out, asking Celeste to correct his pronunciation during their lessons without telling her why. Now seemed like the right time. He spoke in Russian, careful with each syllable. "I love you." Her eyes went wide. For a moment she just stared at him, and he worried he had said it wrong, that he had made some terrible mistake in pronunciation that changed the meaning. But then she made a small sound, halfway between a laugh and a sob, and launched herself across the space between them. She kissed him. It was the first time, and it was eager and awkward and perfect. When she pulled back, her eyes were shining. "I love you," she said, in English this time, the words slightly accented but clear. "I love you, Clayton." He kissed her again, deeper this time, his hands coming up to cup her face. She leaned into him, all the careful distance they had been maintaining dissolving in an instant. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she laughed and said something in Russian. "What?" he asked. "I said I was hoping you would say it. I have been trying to tell you for weeks, but I did not know how, in Russian or English. Either." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose, making her laugh again. "We should probably see the preacher," she nodded. "Yes, make it proper." "Honest," he corrected gently. "Honest," she repeated. They were married 2 days later in a simple ceremony at the church in Salida. Mrs. Patterson stood as witness, along with Tom Webster from the livery. Celeste wore a dress she had made herself from fabric Clayton had bought on their last trip to town, deep blue that brought out her eyes. She still did not understand all the English words of the ceremony, but Clayton had translated it for her the night before, and when Reverend Thomas asked if she took Clayton to be her husband, she said, "I do," clearly, and without hesitation. The wedding supper that night was just the two of them, which was how they both preferred it. Celeste had made a special meal, something from her childhood, she said, with ingredients she had asked Clayton to buy. It was delicious, rich and hearty, perfect for the cold November evening. After supper, Clayton gave her his wedding gift. It was a small book, bound in leather. Inside, he had written down every word he had learned in Russian, organized alphabetically with the English translations. At the back, he had done the same in reverse, English to Russian. Hundreds of words, months of work. She turned the pages slowly, tears streaming down her face. When she looked up at him, she said something in Russian that he now understood perfectly. "This is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. I wanted to be able to talk to you properly." to understand you. You already do, she said, switching to English. Better than anyone. That night, their wedding night, was tender and sweet, and everything Clayton had not known he was hoping for. Afterward, lying in his bed that was now their bed, Celeste curled against his side, he felt a contentment he had never experienced before. "Tell me about your family," he said in Russian, stroking her hair. She was quiet for a moment. "My parents died when I was young. Fever. I had a brother older. He worked on the docks. When the men came with their promises, he tried to stop them. They hurt him badly. I do not know if he lived." Clayton pulled her closer. "I am sorry. It is past now. This is my life now, here, with you." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him. "What about your family?" "My parents have a farm in Missouri. 2 sisters, both married with children. A brother who went to California for the gold rush and never came back. I left home at 18, wanted to see the mountains. Worked as a ranch hand for years, saved up enough to buy this land. That was 3 years ago. Do they know about me? I wrote to my mother when I sent for a bride. I should write again, tell her we are properly married now. Maybe in the spring we could go visit them." She smiled. "I would like that." They talked late into the night, switching between English and Russian, filling in the gaps of their stories. Clayton told her about breaking horses, about the wild beauty of Colorado, about his hopes for the ranch. Celeste told him about Russia, about her village near the Black Sea, about the songs her mother used to sing. "Sing for me," he asked. She did, soft and low, a lullaby in Russian that made his chest ache with its beauty. He did not understand all the words, but he felt their meaning. Home. Safety. Love. Winter deepened as November gave way to December. Snow fell heavy and frequent, blanketing the ranch in white silence. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Celeste took over most of the cooking and household management, which freed Clayton to focus on the horses and maintaining the buildings. They still had their evening lessons, but now they were teaching each other equally. Celeste's English improved rapidly, though her accent remained thick. Clayton's Russian got better too, though she still laughed at some of his pronunciations. One afternoon in mid-December, a blizzard rolled in without warning. Clayton was in the barn checking on the horses when the wind picked up suddenly, bringing driving snow that reduced visibility to almost nothing. He got the horses settled and secured the barn doors, then fought his way back to the house through what had become a whiteout. Celeste met him at the door, pulling him inside and helping him out of his snow-covered coat. "I was worried," she said. "I am fine, but we are going to be stuck inside for a while. This is a bad one." The storm lasted 3 days. They kept the fire burning constantly, rationing the firewood carefully. Celeste made soups and stews that stretched their food supplies. They played cards, read aloud to each other, and spent long hours just talking. On the second day, when cabin fever was starting to set in, Clayton taught her to dance. There was no music except what they made themselves, humming and singing, but they waltzed around the small sitting room, laughing when they bumped into furniture. On the third day, the wind finally died down and the snow stopped. Clayton dug his way to the barn to check on the animals. Everyone was fine, though restless from being cooped up. He spent hours breaking up ice in water troughs and making sure everyone had enough feed. When he came back to the house, cold and exhausted, Celeste had heated water for a bath. It was a luxury in winter when every drop had to be melted from snow, and he was touched by the gesture. As he soaked in the warm water, she washed his hair, her fingers gentle on his scalp. "Thank you," he said, "for taking care of me." "That is what a wife does," she replied. "Not all wives." She was quiet for a moment. "I know what it is to be cold and alone and afraid. I will never let you feel that way, not if I can help it." He reached back and took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I will never let you feel that way again either. I promise." Christmas came, their first as a married couple. They decorated the house with pine boughs and berries. Celeste made traditional Russian dishes while Clayton attempted cookies from his mother's recipe, which came out burned but edible. They exchanged simple gifts. He gave her a pair of gloves he had secretly bought in town, lined with rabbit fur to keep her hands warm. She gave him a scarf she had knitted in secret, working on it during the hours when he was out with the horses. "How did you have time to make this?" he asked, wrapping it around his neck. It was perfect, warm and soft and long enough to cover his face in the worst weather. "I am fast," she said with a mischievous smile. That night they sat by the fire and she taught him Russian Christmas carols while he taught her English ones. Their voices blended together, not quite harmonizing but creating something beautiful anyway. January brought brutal cold and more snow. February was not much better. But inside their small house they were warm and happy. They made love frequently, learning each other's bodies, growing bolder and more confident. Celeste bloomed under the security and affection, her laughter coming more easily, her smiles more frequent. By the time March arrived with its promise of spring, they had fallen into a rhythm that felt like it had always existed. They worked together to tap maple trees for syrup, a process Clayton had learned from a neighbor. They prepared the garden plot for spring planting. They mended fences and repaired the winter damage to the barn roof. One evening in late March, Celeste was quieter than usual at supper. Clayton watched her push food around her plate, barely eating. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked. She looked up, and there was something in her eyes he could not quite read. "I need to tell you something." His heart clenched. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong, I think. I am almost certain." She took a breath. "I am with child." For a moment, Clayton could not process the words. Then joy flooded through him so suddenly it almost hurt. "Truly," she nodded, smiling now. "I have missed my time twice now, and I am sick in the mornings, and my breasts are tender." He was around the table in an instant, pulling her up into his arms, kissing her deeply. When he pulled back, he realized he was shaking. "A baby, we are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" she asked, and he heard the slight uncertainty in her voice. "Happy, Celeste, I am." He could not find words big enough. Instead, he dropped to his knees in front of her, pressing his face to her still flat stomach. "I love you, both of you." Her hands came down to stroke his hair. "I love you too." They went to see Doc Morrison the next week to confirm it. The doctor examined Celeste and declared her healthy and about 3 months along, which meant the baby would come in late September or early October. "First baby?" Doc Morrison asked. "Yes," Celeste said, and Clayton heard the nervousness in her voice. "Well, you are young and strong. Should be just fine. Mrs. Pierce, you come see me once a month until the last 2 months, then every 2 weeks. And Mr. Pierce, you make sure she rests and does not overwork herself." "I will," Clayton promised. As spring unfolded across the Colorado mountains, they prepared for the baby. Clayton built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it smooth so there would be no splinters. Celeste sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her stitches neat and careful. They discussed names in both English and Russian, unable to agree on anything yet, but enjoying the debates. Celeste's English was quite good now, though she still reverted to Russian when she was tired or emotional. Clayton's Russian was passable, enough to have real conversations. They had started mixing the languages naturally, sometimes using whichever word came to mind first regardless of which language it came from. In May, they received a letter from Clayton's mother. He had written to her in January to share the news of the marriage and the baby. Her response was warm and enthusiastic, full of advice and congratulations. She said the whole family was excited to meet Celeste and hoped they could visit in the summer. "Your mother sounds kind," Celeste said, reading the letter herself. Her reading was slower than her speaking, but she was determined to learn. "She is. She will love you." "What if she does not? What if none of them do?" The old fear crept into her voice. Clayton pulled her close. "They will love you because I love you and because you are a good person. But even if they did not, which they will, it would not change anything. You are my wife. This is our family now." She relaxed against him. "Our family, I like that." In June, they planted a large vegetable garden and Celeste started keeping more chickens. She had plans for expanding, talking about maybe getting a milk cow, perhaps some pigs. Clayton loved watching her make plans, seeing her invest in this place as a permanent home. One hot afternoon in July, Clayton was working in the barn when he heard a rider approaching fast. He came out to see Tom Webster from the livery pulling his horse to a hard stop. "Clayton, you need to come to town. There has been trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Some men rode in asking about foreign women, specifically Russian. They had a photograph. Clayton, it looked like your wife." Ice flooded through Clayton's veins. "Where are they now?" "At the saloon, last I saw. Folks have been putting them off, saying they do not know anything, but I do not know how long that will hold." "Go back to town. Find the sheriff, tell him I am coming. And Tom, thank you." Tom nodded and rode off. Clayton went into the house where Celeste was kneading bread dough, her movements practiced and easy. She looked up with a smile that faded when she saw his face. "What happened?" "Men are in town looking for you. We need to hide you somewhere safe." The color drained from her face. "They found me. They will not take you, I promise." He was already moving, gathering supplies. His rifle, ammunition, water, food. "There is a cave up in the rocks behind the north pasture. I found it last year. Can you ride a horse alone?" "Yes." Her voice was steady despite her fear. "Good, take Daisy, she is the calmest. Go to the cave and wait there. I will come for you when it is safe." "What are you going to do?" "Whatever I have to." He cupped her face in his hands. "Trust me." "I trust you. Clayton, be careful." "I will. Now go." He watched her ride north, staying low and fast, disappearing into the trees. Then he mounted his own horse and rode hard for town. The saloon was busy when he arrived. Afternoon crowd mixing with the usual layabouts. Clayton spotted the strangers immediately, 3 men in city clothes that marked them as outsiders. They were showing a photograph to the bartender, who was shaking his head. Clayton walked up to them directly. "I hear you are looking for someone." The tallest of the 3 turned, looking Clayton up and down. "We are looking for a girl. Russian. She would have arrived on the mail-order bride train back in September. You know anything about that? Why are you looking for her? That is our business. If you are looking for someone in my town, asking questions about mail-order brides, you make it my business." Clayton kept his voice level, aware that the saloon had gone quiet around them. The man's eyes narrowed. "You are Clayton Pierce, the one who ordered the Russian bride." "I am married, if that is what you mean. We need to see her, confirm her identity." "Why? She is a runaway. She owes a debt to our employer." "That is a lie." Clayton's hand moved to rest on his holster, not threatening but present. "I know my wife's story. I know what your employer did." "She owes nothing to anyone." The man's face hardened. "That is not for you to decide. Where is she?" "Safe, and you are not going to find her. We can get the sheriff involved. Please do. Sheriff Garrett is a friend of mine." As if summoned, the sheriff himself appeared in the doorway, Tom Webster behind him. "Problem here, Clayton?" Sheriff Garrett asked. "These men are looking for my wife. They claim she owes them something. I say they need to leave town." The sheriff looked at the 3 strangers. "You boys have any legal claim here? Papers? Warrant?" The tall man hesitated just long enough to reveal the truth. We represent a business interest. That is not a legal claim. And harassment of citizens is against the law in my town. I suggest you move along. We have rights. You have the right to leave peacefully or be escorted to the town line. Your choice. The tension stretched out for a long moment. Clayton kept his hand near his gun, ready, but finally the tall man nodded to his companions. "This is not over," he said to Clayton. "Yes, it is. She is my wife, legal and proper. You have no claim, and if you come back you will have more than just me to deal with." Clayton gestured around the saloon where several other men had stood up, making their presence known. The three strangers left, but Clayton did not relax. He stayed in town until he saw them ride out south, back toward Denver. Only then did he thank the sheriff and the others who had stood with him. "Your wife is a good woman," the sheriff said. "Mrs. Garrett speaks highly of her. Whatever trouble she had before she came here, that is in the past as far as I am concerned. I appreciate that." Clayton rode back to the ranch, then continued north to the cave. He found Celeste sitting at the entrance, the rifle he had given her across her knees, watching the approach. When she saw him, relief flooded her face. "It is over," he said, dismounting. "They are gone." She set down the rifle and came into his arms, trembling. "Are you sure?" The sheriff ran them off. "Half the town stood with me. You are safe." She pressed her face to his chest. "I was so afraid. Not for me, but for you, for the baby. I know. But I told you I will never let anything happen to you. I meant it." They rode back to the ranch together, staying close. That night, Clayton barred the door and kept the rifle near, but nothing happened. The men did not come back. Still, it took several days before Celeste relaxed fully, before the fear faded from her eyes. August brought intense heat and afternoon thunderstorms that rolled through the valley with spectacular lightning. Celeste was heavily pregnant now, moving more slowly, her hands often resting on her swollen belly. Clayton fussed over her constantly, making her rest, bringing her cool water, rubbing her swollen feet. "I am not made of glass," she protested one evening when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I know, but let me take care of you anyway." She smiled and allowed it because she knew it made him feel better. They were lying in bed one night in late August when she took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "Feel that?" He felt a strong push against his palm and his eyes widened. "The baby is kicking. Very strong, like the father." She covered his hand with hers. "I have been thinking about names. Oh, for a boy, I would like to name him after my brother. Dimitri, is that all right?" "Dimitri Pierce, I like it. And for a girl, what was your grandmother's name?" "Elizabeth." "That is beautiful. Elizabeth Dimitrievna Pierce, using both our traditions." Clayton kissed her. "Perfect." September arrived with cooler temperatures and the first hints of autumn color in the aspen groves. Celeste had 2 more weeks before her due date, according to Doc Morrison. She had prepared everything, had all the baby clothes washed and folded, the cradle set up beside their bed, supplies gathered. Clayton was mending a fence in the east pasture when he heard the bell ringing from the house. It was the signal they had agreed on if Celeste needed him urgently. He dropped his tools and ran. He found her in the kitchen, leaning against the table, breathing hard. "The baby is coming." "Now, are you sure?" "Very sure. My water broke. Clayton, you need to get the doctor." He helped her to the bedroom, getting her settled, then rode for town as fast as his horse could carry him. Doc Morrison was with a patient but came immediately when Clayton explained. They rode back together, the doctor bringing his bag and a calm demeanor that helped steady Clayton's nerves. "First babies take a while usually," Doc Morrison said. "Could be hours yet." It was hours. Long, difficult hours where Clayton felt utterly helpless. He held Celeste's hand, brought her water, wiped her face with a cool cloth. She was strong through the labor, gritting her teeth through the contractions, only crying out when the pain became too much. "You are doing so well," he kept telling her in Russian, the language of comfort for her. "So strong, I love you." Night fell and the labor continued. Doc Morrison checked her periodically, assuring them both that everything was progressing normally, just slowly. Clayton had never felt so useless in his life. Finally, near midnight, Doc Morrison said, "All right, Mrs. Pierce, next contraction, I need you to push." What followed was the most intense 10 minutes of Clayton's life. Celeste squeezed his hand so hard he thought bones might break, but he did not care. She pushed and screamed and worked harder than he had ever seen anyone work at anything. And then there was a different sound. A baby's cry, strong and healthy. "It is a boy," Doc Morrison announced, holding up the squirming, wailing infant. "A big, healthy boy." Celeste was laughing and crying at the same time. The doctor cleaned the baby quickly and handed him to her. Clayton looked down at his son, this impossibly tiny person with a red face and dark hair, and felt his entire world shift. "Dmitri," Celeste whispered, touching the baby's cheek. "Our Dmitri." Clayton could not speak. He just bent down and kissed her forehead, then carefully touched his son's small hand. Dimitri's fingers wrapped around one of Clayton's calloused fingers, gripping tight, and Clayton felt tears running down his face. "He is perfect," Clayton finally managed. "You are perfect, thank you." Doc Morrison finished cleaning up and checking Celeste, declared them both healthy, and left them alone with their new son. Clayton climbed carefully into bed beside Celeste, and they held Dmitri between them, marveling at every tiny feature. "He has your nose," Celeste said. "He has your eyes." "How can you tell? They are barely open." "I just know." They stayed like that until dawn, taking turns holding the baby, watching him sleep, still not quite believing he was real. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diapers and the steep learning curve of new parents. But they figured it out together. Celeste recovered quickly from the birth, and Clayton discovered he loved being a father, loved watching his son's tiny expressions, loved the weight of him sleeping on his chest. October brought the first snow to the high peaks and perfect autumn weather to the valley. On a clear Saturday afternoon, there was a knock at the door. Clayton answered it to find a woman standing there, perhaps 50 years old, with kind eyes and a familiar smile. "Hello, son," his mother said. Clayton's jaw dropped. "Ma, what are you doing here? Coming to meet my grandson, of course. Did you really think I would wait until you got around to visiting?" She pushed past him into the house where Celeste was sitting with Dmitri. "And you must be Celeste. Oh, let me see him." What followed was a whirlwind week. Clayton's mother, Margaret Pierce, had brought his younger sister, Emma, and Emma's husband, Frank. They had come all the way from Missouri, a long journey that they insisted was worth every mile. Margaret fell in love with Celeste immediately, and the feeling was mutual. Despite the language barrier that still existed with some words, they communicated perfectly. Margaret taught Celeste her recipes and shared stories about Clayton as a child that made Celeste laugh until she cried. She also insisted that they properly celebrate Dimitri's birth with a party. The party was held at the ranch on a Saturday afternoon in mid-October. It seemed like half of Salida showed up, bearing gifts and well wishes. Mrs. Patterson came with books for when Dmitri was older. The sheriff and his wife brought a rocking horse. Even Sarah Mitchell, the gossiping banker's wife, came with a beautifully embroidered baby blanket and an apology for her earlier coldness. "I was wrong to judge," she said quietly to Celeste. "You are clearly a good mother and a good wife." "I am sorry." Celeste accepted the apology with grace. "Thank you. That means much." Clayton watched his wife move through the party, switching easily between English and Russian when talking to different people, their son in her arms, smiling and laughing. He thought about the terrified woman who had stepped off that stagecoach 13 months ago and marveled at the transformation. Or maybe not a transformation. Maybe this is who she had always been, just finally safe enough to show it. "You did good, son," his mother said, appearing beside him. "I got lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it. You were kind when you could have been cruel, patient when you could have been demanding. You gave her time and respect and love. That is not luck, that is character." Clayton felt his throat tighten. "She saved me too, you know. I did not realize how lonely I was until she was here." Margaret patted his arm. "That is what love does. It completes us." His family stayed for another week, then reluctantly headed back to Missouri with promises to return in the spring. The ranch felt quiet after they left, but it was a good quiet. A peaceful quiet. Winter came again, their second together. But this year was different with a baby in the house. Dmitri grew fast, becoming more alert, starting to smile and coo. Celeste sang to him in Russian while Clayton read to him in English. They both agreed he should grow up knowing both languages, both cultures. Spring arrived, then summer. Dmitri learned to roll over, then to sit up, then to crawl. He was a happy baby, quick to smile, curious about everything. They celebrated his first birthday in September with just the three of them, a small cake that Dmitri mostly just smashed with his hands. "He is going to be 1 year old tomorrow," Celeste said that night after they had put him to bed. "It does not seem possible. I know, time is going too fast." Clayton pulled her close on the porch where they sat watching the sunset. "Do you remember this time 2 years ago, when I first arrived? Of course, I was so scared. I was terrified too." She looked up at him in surprise. "You were, absolutely. I had no idea what I was doing." "I still do not, most of the time," she laughed. "You do fine. Better than fine. Clayton, I need to tell you something." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. She was smiling, a secret kind of smile. "I am pregnant again." Joy flooded through him. "Really? Really?" "Due in late April or early May, I think." He kissed her deeply. "Another baby, that is wonderful. You are happy. I know Dmitri is still so young." "I am thrilled, are you?" "Yes. I want many children if we are blessed with them. I want this house full of life and love and laughter. I want the family I lost. We will build it together," he promised. Their daughter Elizabeth arrived on a rainy morning in May, smaller than Dmitri had been but just as healthy. She had Celeste's dark hair and Clayton's green eyes, and she barely cried, just looked around with a serious expression that made them both laugh. Dmitri was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her and bring her his toys. They had to watch him carefully to make sure he was gentle, but he was surprisingly good with her. The years that followed were full and rich. They added a milk cow and pigs, expanded the garden, built an addition onto the house to make room for the growing family. Celeste became fluent in English, though she never lost her accent. Clayton's Russian remained good enough for conversation, and they still mixed the languages naturally at home. They had 2 more children. Another son, Thomas, arrived 2 years after Elizabeth. Then 3 years later, a second daughter they named Margaret after Clayton's mother. The house was indeed full of life and laughter, and the chaos of children. Celeste taught all the children Russian along with English. She told them stories of her homeland, taught them songs, made traditional foods. But she also embraced American traditions, learning new recipes, celebrating holidays with enthusiasm. She had found a way to honor both parts of herself. Clayton continued breeding and training horses, building a reputation that brought buyers from as far away as Denver. The ranch prospered, not making them rich but providing a comfortable living. More importantly, it provided a good life. One evening in early summer, when Dimitri was 10 and Margaret just learning to walk. The family sat on the porch after supper. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. Celeste sat beside Clayton on the bench he had built, her hand in his. "Do you remember the day I arrived?" she asked suddenly. "Every detail. Would you do it again, knowing how hard it would be at first?" Clayton looked at her, this woman who had come to him as a stranger and become his everything. In a heartbeat, every difficult moment was worth it to get here. "I used to be angry," she said quietly, "about what happened to me before, the men who brought me here with lies, the things they forced us to do. I was so angry for so long. You had every right to be. But I am not anymore. Because if none of that had happened, I would not have ended up in that program. I would not have come to Colorado. I would not have met you. And I would not have this life, these children, this happiness. I'm not glad it happened, but I am glad for where it led me." Clayton kissed her temple. "I love you. I have told you that 1,000 times in both languages, but I will never stop saying it. I love you too. Thank you for learning my language. Thank you for everything you did to make me feel safe and loved. You made it easy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun set behind the mountains. Dimitri was teaching Elizabeth how to skip stones in the creek. Thomas was building something elaborate with sticks. Little Margaret toddled around, picking flowers and bringing them to her parents with proud smiles. This was the life Clayton had dreamed of when he built this ranch. But the reality was so much richer than anything he had imagined. Not because it was perfect or easy, but because it was real. Because it was built on a foundation of patience and kindness and love that had grown deeper with every passing year. The mail-order bride who had arrived speaking no English had become the heart of his home. The terrified woman who flinched at his touch now reached for his hand without thinking. The girl who had lost everything had built something beautiful from the ashes. And the cowboy who had learned her language to say, "I love you," had discovered that love itself was the only language that truly mattered. Everything else was just finding the words to express what the heart already knew. Years continued to unfold, each bringing its own joys and challenges. Dimitri grew tall and strong, with his father's way with horses and his mother's gift for languages. At 16, he was already helping run the ranch, talking about someday expanding it. Elizabeth was quieter, bookish, spending hours reading everything she could find. Thomas had inherited his mother's cooking talent and surprised them all by deciding he wanted to be a chef. And little Margaret, who was not so little anymore at 8 years old, was pure energy and mischief, keeping everyone on their toes. Celeste had become a pillar of the Salida community. She taught Russian to anyone interested, helped new immigrants navigate the challenges of settling in America, and organized cultural events that celebrated the diverse backgrounds of the town's residents. The banker's wife, who had once looked down on her, now considered her a dear friend. Clayton's horse breeding business had become one of the most respected in Colorado. Buyers came from across the West seeking his horses, known for their temperament and endurance. He had trained Dimitri and even Elizabeth in the art of working with horses, passing on everything he had learned. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Clayton took Celeste on a trip, leaving the children with his mother, who had moved to Salida to be closer to the family after Clayton's father passed. They went to the high country, to a pristine alpine lake he had found years ago but never had the chance to show her. They camped under the stars, something they had not done since before the children arrived. Lying in their bedrolls looking up at the brilliant expanse of the Milky Way, Celeste said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had gotten on that stage coach back to the east? Sometimes, but I am grateful you did not." "Me too." She rolled over to face him. Clayton, we have built something wonderful here, not just the ranch, but a real family, a real home. Thank you for giving me that chance. We built it together, and I am not done yet. I want 50 more years with you," she laughed. "We would be very old." "I do not care. I want every single day." He kissed her under the stars, and it felt like that first kiss by the fireplace 20 years ago, full of promise and possibility. When they returned home, they found the house in chaos. Margaret had tried to bake a cake as a surprise and had somehow managed to get flour on every surface in the kitchen. Thomas had attempted to help clean up and knocked over a bucket of wash water. Elizabeth was trying to restore order while reading a book, which was not working well. And Dmitri had wisely escaped to the barn. Celeste looked at the mess, at their children's guilty and sheepish faces, and burst out laughing. Clayton joined in, and soon all the children were laughing too. They spent the evening cleaning up together, telling stories, making the ruined cake somehow edible by covering it in extra frosting. This was life. Messy, chaotic, imperfect, and absolutely beautiful. More years passed. Dmitri married a rancher's daughter from the next valley over, a strong woman who loved horses as much as he did. They settled on a portion of the Pierce land, building their own home, starting their own family. Elizabeth went to Denver for teachers' college and came back with a degree and a quiet accountant husband who adored her. Thomas headed to San Francisco to apprentice with a renowned chef, writing long letters home about his adventures. Margaret, their youngest, fell in love with the son of the town doctor and married him in a beautiful ceremony at the ranch when she was 20. She and her husband opened a medical practice together in Salida, serving the growing community. Clayton and Celeste became grandparents many times over, their house frequently full of visiting children and grandchildren. Celeste taught them all Russian, told them all the stories, made sure they knew their heritage. Clayton taught them about horses and ranching and the value of hard work. They grew older together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes from years of laughter. But their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, more essential. On a spring morning when Clayton was 58 and Celeste 55, they sat on the porch as they had done thousands of times before. The ranch bustled with activity as their grown children and grandchildren visited for Easter. The sound of young voices carried from the yard where a new generation played the same games their parents had played. "Did you ever think we would have all this?" Celeste asked, her hand in his. "When you stepped off that stagecoach all those years ago?" "No, I hoped for companionship. Maybe friendship eventually, but this is beyond anything I could have imagined. I was so afraid that day, I know. But you were kind. Even when I could not understand you, I could see the kindness in your eyes. That is what made me stay." Clayton lifted her hand to his lips. "I am glad you did. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. And you to me. You learned my language to tell me you loved me. That is when I knew for certain that we would be all right, that we would build something lasting." "I love you," he said in Russian, the words as familiar now as breathing. "I love you too," she replied in English. They sat together, watching their family, the life they had built spreading out before them like a promise kept. The mail-order bride and the cowboy. Two people who had found each other across languages and cultures and circumstances, who had built a love story for the ages. The Wild West had been tamed somewhat in the decades since Celeste's arrival. Salida had electric lights now and a railroad that brought goods and people from across the country. The frontier was closing, becoming settled, civilized, but some things remained timeless. Love, family, the bond between two people who chose each other every single day. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Their youngest grandchild, a boy of 5, came running up to the porch. "Grandpa, Grandma, will you tell us the story?" he asked breathlessly. "About how you met." It was a request they received often, one they never tired of fulfilling. The children and grandchildren loved hearing about the stagecoach and the language barrier, and how their grandfather had learned Russian just to say, "I love you." "Well," Clayton began, settling the boy on his lap while other grandchildren gathered around, drawn by the promise of a story. "It was a warm September day in 1883, and I was standing in front of the general store in Salida when the stagecoach arrived." Celeste picked up the thread. "I was so scared when I stepped down. Everything was strange and new, and I could not speak English at all. But your grandmother was beautiful," Clayton continued, "and brave, even though she was afraid." They told the story together, switching between English and Russian, filling in details, making the children laugh at the parts about misunderstandings and gasp at the parts about danger. They told about the long winter nights learning each other's languages, about the moment Clayton first said, "I love you" in Russian, about building a life one day at a time. When they finished, one of the older grandchildren, Dimitri's daughter, said, "That is the most romantic story ever." "It is a true one," Celeste said. "And the lesson is that love takes work. It takes patience and kindness and the willingness to meet someone where they are. Your grandfather gave me all of that." "Your grandmother taught me that love is worth any effort," Clayton added. "Worth learning a new language, worth fighting for, worth building a life around." As the evening drew on, and the family eventually dispersed to various rooms and beds, Clayton and Celeste remained on the porch. It was their favorite time, these quiet moments after everyone else had settled. "Do you think we did right by them?" Celeste asked. "All our children. I think they are happy, successful, good people. What more could we ask for? Nothing, you are right. I just want them to know how much they are loved, how grateful I am for this life. They know. We made sure of that." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from decades of knowing each other so well that words are not always necessary. The night sounds of the ranch surrounded them, horses moving in the pasture, the creek flowing nearby, the wind in the trees. "Clayton," Celeste said softly. "Yes." "Thank you for everything. For learning my language, for protecting me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful family and this wonderful life. Thank you." He pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Thank you for getting off that stagecoach. Thank you for staying. Thank you for saying yes to building this life with me. Every day with you has been a gift." They stayed there until the moon rose high, silvering the landscape, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last far beyond their own years. Their children would pass down the story, and their grandchildren, and their great-grandchildren after that. The tale of the mail-order bride who arrived speaking no English and the cowboy who learned her language to say, "I love you." But more than the story, they would pass down the lesson. That love is patient, that kindness matters, that the effort to truly understand another person is always worthwhile. That differences can be bridges rather than barriers if you approach them with an open heart. As they finally went inside for the night, Clayton took one last look at the ranch he had built, the home they had filled with love and laughter and life. Everything he had ever wanted was here, had been here since the day a frightened young woman stepped off a stagecoach and into his life. He had ordered a mail-order bride out of practical necessity. Instead, he had found his soulmate, his partner, his everything. The Wild West may have been rough and hard and unforgiving, but it had also brought them together, had given them the space to build something extraordinary. In the bedroom, as they settled into bed, Celeste curled against him the way she had every night for over 30 years. "Good night, my love," she whispered. "Good night," he replied. Then in Russian he added the words he tried to say every single day. I love you. I love you too, she answered in English. And in the mixing of their languages, in the comfort of their embrace, in the house full of children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built together, their love story continued. Not with grand gestures or dramatic moments, but with the steady, enduring devotion of two people who had chosen each other and kept choosing each other, day after day, year after year. The Wild West had tested them, challenged them, tried to break them. But they had emerged stronger, their bond forged in the fires of hardship and tempered by joy. They had created not just a family, but a legacy of love that would ripple out through generations. And it had all started with a cowboy willing to learn a new language just to tell a frightened woman that she was loved. That simple act of kindness, that willingness to meet her where she was, had changed both their lives forever. As sleep claimed them, wrapped in each other's arms, the ranch settled into peaceful night around them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new moments to treasure. But tonight they rested in the certainty of their love, the assurance that whatever came, they would face it together. Their story was not one of perfect people or a perfect life. It was a story of real people with real struggles who chose love anyway, who worked at it, fought for it, built it day by day into something unshakable. The mail-order bride had become a beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and pillar of the community. The cowboy had become a devoted husband, father, grandfather, and respected rancher. Together, they had created something beautiful in the rugged landscape of the Colorado mountains. And every time their grandchildren asked for the story of how they met, every time they told of learning each other's languages and building understanding word by word, they reinforced the message that love is not just a feeling but a choice, an action, a commitment renewed daily. Years would continue to pass. They would celebrate 50th anniversary, surrounded by a family that had grown even larger. They would hold great-grandchildren and marvel at the continuation of their legacy. And through it all, until their final days, they would continue to choose each other, to love each other, to be grateful for the chance encounter that had brought them together. The stagecoach that arrived in Salida, Colorado in September of 1883 had carried more than just a frightened young woman. It had carried the seeds of a love story that would span decades, touch countless lives, and prove that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. Clayton and Celeste Pierce built a life of meaning and purpose, of love and dedication. They showed their children and grandchildren what true partnership looked like. They demonstrated that differences enrich rather than divide. They proved that with patience, kindness, and effort, any obstacle can be overcome. And it all came back to those three simple words, spoken in a language learned specifically to express the deepest truth of the heart. I love you. Я люблю тебя. However you said it, in whatever language, the meaning was the same. And that meaning had built an empire not of wealth or power, but of love and family and enduring happiness. The Wild West provided the backdrop, but their love provided the story. And it was a story with the happiest of endings, one that continued to unfold with each new generation, each new child born into the family they had created, each person touched by their example. As the years stretched on and they moved into their twilight years, their children and grandchildren took over more of the ranch work. Clayton and Celeste spent their days much as they had spent them for decades, together. Walking the land they loved, sitting on the porch, telling stories, holding hands. They had lived full lives, rich lives, meaningful lives. And when the time came for them to leave this world, they did so peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had loved well, raised their family well, and left the world better than they found it. Their grave markers stood side by side in the small cemetery outside Salida, overlooking the mountains and the valley. The inscriptions were simple: Clayton Pierce, beloved husband, father, grandfather. 1857–1942, Celeste Pierce, beloved wife, mother, grandmother. 1862–1943. But the real monument to their love was not in stone. It was in the thriving ranch still run by their descendants. It was in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried their names and their values. It was in the story, still told around dinner tables and campfires, of the mail-order bride and the cowboy who learned her language. Their love story became legend in Salida, but it was a legend built on truth. A testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the beauty of two people who chose to build something together despite every obstacle. And somewhere in the hearts of their descendants, in the mixing of Russian and English that still flavored family gatherings, in the values of hard work and devotion that still guided their choices, Clayton and Celeste's love lived on. The Wild West had been their beginning, but love had been their story. And it was a story that never truly ended, just continued in new chapters written by each generation that followed, all of them built on the foundation of two people who met as strangers and became everything to each other.